Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Udutola. I'm a professor in the Applied Ethics Department at St. Petersburg College. Today, we're going to look at Chapter 1 that focuses on the foundations of ethics. We're going to divide our presentation into several sections. First, we're going to look at key terms so that we're operating from the same vocabulary. Number 2, we're going to talk about how do we decide if we're doing what is morally right. We'll talk about that. Number 3, we're going to look at the doctrine of separate but equal that started in the state of Louisiana in 1890. And under that, we're also going to look at 2 landmark cases in the United States, Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896, Brown versus Board of Education, 1954. And lastly, we're going to talk about Dr. King's letter that he wrote when he was in Birmingham jail. And so we're going to begin looking at some key terms. The very first key term that we're going to look at is ethics. And our definition of ethics is the reasoned study of what is morally right and wrong, what is good and bad. The key term in this definition is reasoned, because we believe we can teach our students to use logic and to use reason in identifying ethical issues and also in resolving those ethical issues. Ethikos and ethos are the 2 Greek words for ethics, and they mean the way people ought to be. The next key term that we're going to look at is morality. Morality is really the study of social norms and standards, beliefs, values that we grew up on. And more is the Latin word for morality, which means the way we are, the way we act, the way we behave. The next ethical issue that we're going to look at, the next term that we're going to look at is ethical issues. Ethical issues dealing with actions and situations in which we are really concerned about the morality of the behavior. A very quick example, the 17-year-old that was shot 17 times as a result of police brutality in Chicago. The question that comes to mind, irregardless of where you are on this debate, is why does the law enforcement have to shoot this boy 19 different times? This is an issue that we're forced to really think about in terms of the morality of that behavior. The next key term is critical thinking, which focuses on logical problem solving, systematic problem solving. The next key term is situational ethics, in which we determine what is right based on the momentary context. And the very last term that we're going to talk about, conflict of interest. This happens a lot in political situations where there's a conflict between individuals' personal needs and their professional obligations. So how do we decide if we're doing what is right? The first thing that tells us if we're doing what is right is our gut instincts, our conscience, our inner voice. Some people refer to it that way. We also have laws and rules that govern human behavior in any given social contract. And again, we have guidelines like the Golden Rule. Treat others as you want to be treated. Confucius actually used the Golden Rule, but stated it in a different way. Not to do to others what we do not want done to us. The guideline of Immanuel Kant in his categorical imperative universality, Immanuel Kant actually tells us that we should act on the maxim. A maxim just simply means a rule. We should act on the maxim that we can will to be universal. What Immanuel Kant is actually saying right here is that any action that we're planning to undertake, the question we need to ask ourselves is, can this action become a standard that everyone can follow? If it can, then that action is morally permissible. If that action cannot become a moral standard, cannot be universalized, then we have to throw that action away. Critical thinking is the critical thinking model that we actually developed within the applied ethics department. And we teach our students to use this critical thinking to identify ethical issues and how to resolve the ethical issues. So the next step of our presentation is to look at the doctrine of separate but equal. And under the doctrine of separate but equal, we're going to focus on two landmark cases: Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896, and Brown versus Board of Education, 1954. Now, Plessy versus Ferguson, in 1890, the state of Louisiana enacted and passed a new law that is called the Separate Car Act, that requires separate accommodations for non-whites and whites. Plessy, a 30-year-old mixed black guy, decided to challenge this act by actually purchasing a ticket to a white coach. The ticket was actually sold to him, and so he proceeded to sit in the white-only coach. Eventually, they realized that he was not white, and they asked him to leave. He refused, and he was arrested. Plessy filed a legal recourse in which he alleged that the Separate Car Act actually violated his 13th and 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution. So let us take just about 1 or 2 minutes to unpack the 13th Amendment and the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. The 13th Amendment was ratified in 1865, and it abolished slavery and involuntary servitude. Now, the 14th Amendment, under Section 1, provided 4 provisions. And the very first provisions gave us a definition of who is an American citizen in the United States. It basically states that if you are born or naturalized in the United States, you are an American citizen. Provision 2 basically states that no state shall abridge the privileges and the immunities of its citizens. Provision 3 actually affirmed that no person shall be deprived life, liberty, and property without the due process of law. And provision 4 states that no person shall be denied equal protection of the laws. Okay? So what happened in this case was that Judge Ferguson found Plessy guilty. The case was appealed to the Supreme Court of Louisiana that also found Plessy guilty. And the case was eventually appealed to the United States Supreme Court that also found Plessy guilty in 1896. Now, fast forward to early 1950s. Brown versus Board of Education. Linda Brown was a black student who was denied admission to a white elementary school that was very close to her house in Topeka, Kansas. And so Linda Brown's parents proceeded to consult with the NAACP, and they decided to accept the case, and they accepted 4 similar cases from Kansas, South Carolina, Virginia, and Delaware. And these 4 cases actually were argued before the United States Supreme Court in 1952 by Thurgood Marshall. By May 1954, the United States Supreme Court had struck down the doctrine of separate but equal. Looking forward, 9 years after the United States Supreme Court has already struck down the doctrine of separate but equal, so many southern states were still segregated. And so Dr. King was invited to come to Birmingham to talk to school authorities on how to integrate schools. Birmingham officials did not want Dr. King to come to Birmingham, and so they found an old law, the Parade Act, and they requested that Dr. King had to request for a permit before he could actually give his speech. What the managers in Birmingham were really actually doing here was to violate Dr. King's First Amendment right to free speech, peaceful assembly, and also to protest his government. Dr. King, however, proceeded to request for the permit. The permit was denied, and Dr. King proceeded anyway to give the speech. After he gave the speech, Dr. King was criticized by 8 clergymen that wrote a piece in the local newspaper challenging Dr. King that what he actually did was untimely and unwise. Dr. King felt really wounded because these are actually his professional friends. These are people that he knew. And Dr. King decided to respond. And this is why Dr. King actually responded to their criticism when he was in the Birmingham jail. Dr. King said that there are 2 types of laws: just laws and unjust laws. And he argued that just laws are moral, they are fair, and they should be followed. Unjust laws, he indicated, are immoral, unfair, and should not be obeyed. Dr. King actually used the writings of St. Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, and several sections of the Bible to justify what he did by giving the speech. And so I'm going to ask our students to please take the time to read Dr. King's letter that he wrote when he was in the Birmingham jail. We have provided sections of that letter in chapter 1. Read it, and I want you to actually pay close attention to how Dr. King characterized just laws and how he also characterized unjust laws. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you.